Today's guest is on the podcast is Tony Boquet. Tony and I met at ICMG a few years ago, and we had a really interesting discussion. Tony's done presentations. I also see a lot of his posts online, and they're always fascinating and interesting. So I thought it would be really great if we could have this discussion. And and like we had an interesting discussion on solutionaries, which is something we'll get into in the podcast. And I know there are many topics we can talk about, and Tony's background, he's an author, an educator, he's been involved in life insurance and leadership, and there are, many topics we can get into. So we'll just see where this goes. I don't have a lot of questions here. I'm going to prime the pump because I'm pretty confident Tony can fill the time with some interesting things without me having to ask additional questions. So I'll get right into it. Like I said, I could come up with a bigger introduction, but I figured the best way to do this is Tony, if you want to just give a little bit about your background, as far back as you want to go, that makes sense, and up till present day, and give the listeners, viewers, an idea of where you're coming. For the few who don't know you, I feel like probably at least at ICMG, I'm sure everybody knows you. So
I've been affiliated with ICMG for a long time. So yeah, it's a great organization. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for that great introduction too. Not much more to add. I've been doing this since the ripe old age of 21. So I've been doing this for a little over 40 years in this business. So yeah, I've touched a lot of different areas of the field in the 40 plus years. Started out as a life insurance agent, like everybody else, that's in the life insurance business. They start out as an agent, and then I worked my way up through the ranks. Was an expert witness for legal cases for 8 years. That was my first step out into academia, really, because I had to teach attorneys what they were talking about. They understood the law, but they didn't understand the actual contract and how it affected the agent and how it affected the client. They missed that part. So they hired me as an expert witness to help them understand the context of the cases. So that was fun. That was a very interesting period of my time in the industry. Retired as an estate planner, and then went into academia, went into work for the American College for 18 years, or almost 18. So had a rich career, had a very fulfilling career, enjoyed every minute of it.
great, yeah, it's interesting you talk about teaching lawyers about contracts. I do life product development, and so I end up drafting contracts. And the whole time I get involved in drafting contracts, I have this sinking feeling that I'm the only one that's ever going to read it. Maybe the regulators read it too, but
So true.
But it always amazes me as you're working with insurance companies and people in the insurance company that don't you would think they'd have a stack of the contracts sitting right next to them to refer to when they're talking with customers, talking with agents, but it's a strange. I mean, I understand it; they're not the most exciting reading, but
No, it isn't.
yeah, I mean, I often thought this is all completely off topic, but the whole AI world, I feel like it's going to be a big thing to take AI, dump all the contracts, dump all the information, and have that expert sitting next to you when you have a question about contracts, but topic for another day. So that's great. And I thought I'd ask too, because I spent a year at LSU in grad school, and I see that you're from Southern Louisiana. Where in Southern Louisiana? Are you still in Louisiana? And is that?
No, sir. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, the Nashville
Okay.
area right now, about 18 miles south of Nashville, a little town called Franklin, Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
Been here for 20 some odd years. Moved from South Louisiana a long time ago, even before Katrina hit. I moved away. The first 35 years of my life was in a little town called Berg, Louisiana, which
Oh,
is
okay.
about 70 miles, 75 miles southwest of New Orleans. So it was in the swamps of
Okay.
Louisiana. So
Okay. So I can see, well, you wouldn't assume that you say Southern Louisiana, most people wouldn't know where Bird, and I don't know that, but I did, it was a long time ago. I was at LSU too. It was back in the 70s. Uh, but I did learn about a lot of the little towns, and I loved visiting the little towns and all the festivals. And
oh yeah,
I'd
beautiful
go to
festivals.
Gonzales for jambalaya. I'd go to Brobridge for crawfish, and
Uh-huh. Yeah.
McElhaney to visit the Tabasco factory. So, so
Very
yeah, I have an
nice.
affinity for Louisiana. It's a great place to visit, and I suppose live. I guess I did live in Baton Rouge for a year. But anyway, uh, as you know, we talked about. I read your book. Oh, I forgot to bring it in here. I was going to open it up, but it's your book you written in 2015, The Bloodline of Wisdom, and it was not what I was expecting, but it was a really great read, and it's one that I feel now that I've got to reread because all the and you know the situations where the power of three came into play, and I that lesson certainly makes sense. Being a mathematician, I love the discussions about the triangle and how powerful it is. I mean, triangles are just amazing because it's one of the few branches of geometry where there's a whole mathematical, trigonometry
Oh
is all
yeah,
based on triangles.
exactly right.
And, and I mean, that's a nerdy way to look at it, but, I had that connection that triangles are pretty amazing. Probably circles are the next best thing, but not like triangles. And so that sort of hit home. Um, but I was wondering if you could tell us how you decided to write that book, where you got the ideas from, maybe a summary without giving us too much away. Because I'm hoping that maybe if we get this out there, that a lot more people decide to read it now if that sort of missed it the first time around.
Yep, that'd be amazing. Very interesting question, Chuck. And I've thought about it and answered that question many times since 2015. Um, the impetus of the book was my mother. My mother was probably the wisest person I ever knew. And she had a high school diploma but didn't go further than that. But very wise lady. And I'll never forget, I was in probably 12 years old. I'm one of 8 children, so there was always things happening in our house. Whenever we'd get around the kitchen table and we shared a meal every day, that was non-negotiable. You will be there for supper, and we shared a meal. And around the table, when you have 8 children and 2 adults sitting around the table, conversations go everywhere. And we lived in a small town. We knew a lot of the people that lived in the town. We were related to a lot of people. So whenever we'd go get around that table and somebody would bring up a name in a situation that got someone in trouble, my mother used the same words all the time. They didn't make a wise decision. And that was her comment. Whenever somebody messed up, they didn't make a wise choice or they didn't make a wise decision. So that was constant in my life. And then one day she called the kids together and sat us down, and she was married twice. Her first marriage was to an alcoholic. He would come around the house drunk. It was not a pleasant experience. And one day she brought the kids together and she says, "A decision I made as a young lady is now being paid for by you. You are all paying the price for my bad decision. I made a bad choice, but you're having to deal with that choice. You're experiencing that." And she took the opportunity to explain, that she took full responsibility for making that bad choice. Chuck, I'll never forget what I felt that day. I remember thinking, if my mother, who is the wisest person I know, can't make a good decision, I'm in bad. I'm going to be in a bad place,
Yeah.
because I never viewed myself as a wise person. I never viewed myself, especially as a young child, as being able to make good decisions. I was always getting in trouble. It was, I was a mischievous guy. And so at the time, it really struck a chord with me. And, I tell real life stories when I would be asked to speak. And I've been a speaker in the insurance and financial world for a long time, way before the book. I would give these talks and tell these stories, and people that would hear them say, well, do you have them in a book? Can I get them in a book? Can I get these things written down? And some of my close friends used to tell me, Tony, when you're gone, these stories are going to disappear. You really need to write them down and put them in a book. But I never wanted a book to be about me. I never wanted that. It's just not in who I am. So I decided to use one of my mentors. The book is an homage to a gentleman by the name of Og Mendino. Og wrote a lot of books for the sales profession, and he wrote them in the 60s, 70s. I came up in the business in the early 80s. I got to know who Og was. I've read all his books. He was a mentor of mine. He became a mentor. And I always said if I was going to write a book, it would be like Og. And Og wrote in this same format, in a fable format. So when I thought about writing a book, when it came to me one day, why don't you honor Og by writing a book like he would write, and write it on wise decision making? So I said, okay, I'll try to do that. I read 111 books in 1 year to write one book. The best year of reading I've ever spent in my life. Now, to be fair, some of the books that I read, they weren't what we would consider a book. They were in the BC era, and some of these books were only a couple of pages. But back then, to write, it was difficult. And they didn't have computers, they didn't have typewriters, they didn't have anything but
Any paper.
yeah, they didn't have paper even. So it was a difficult thing. So, but I read a lot of things about, if I was going to write a book about wisdom, I thought, who better to go to than who is the wisest man that ever lived? And it was King Solomon. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Of course, if you're Christian, you believe that spurred from the Bible, that his wisdom came from God because he asked God for wisdom. Well, that's true. But it's also, when I decided to write about the man, I wanted to find out who the man was, not the biblical man, not the man that was tied to the Jewish people, but the man that everybody saw. And at the time, a lot of the pagan that surrounded the Jewish faith, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, they all wrote about this special guy. And I wanted to read what they said. I wanted to know who the man was. Who was this guy that supposedly was the wisest man that ever lived? And it was an amazing journey, Chuck. And, I tell people all the time, I learned more than any of my readers. And I benefited more than any of my readers because I was able to read all of this stuff about a guy that they were just saying what they felt was the truth. They weren't doing it for a specific group. They were just saying, hey, this guy's got something different. He's a different kind of guy. He thinks differently, and we need to listen to this man. And it was so interesting to read all of these things about the man. And that's kind of where the book came from, was from these 111 books. And now that you've read the book, you understand the power of three from Solomon's perspective. Well, what was funny is I finished reading the last book and I counted them, and it was only 110. And then when I looked at the number, I said, oh, that's two, because, in numerology, you add the numbers. So 110 really is the number two. I said, I can't finish this book with reading just 110 books. So I had to find another book to read to get it to 111, to do honor to...
And of course, if it adds up to 3, it's divisible by 3.
That's exactly right. So I had to add that extra book. So it was a struggle to find, too. So, but I did it. So it was kind of fun.
Yeah, that's a trend. And your the idea of the fable or the storytelling. I know I love fiction, science fiction and fantasies and Lord of the Rings and all those kinds of books, but I struggle to do like business books. I said there's a lot of business books. I've read some, but I have to force myself to it, and I learn some stuff from it. But anytime it's this done in the term, and there's a few business books out there that tell things in the form of a story or whatever, much more interesting to read, much easier to keep your attention. And so I think that's great. So without giving anything away, so the reader will get new readers, but can you sort of summarize what the book is about?
Yeah. It's the consensus of what the book is. It's a modern fable. It's modern because it's set in 2 times. It's set in Solomon's time, which was 940 BC, and in the modern times, 1983. So it's a modern fable, and it's a modern fable about a young man who finds the scrolls of King Solomon in his grandfather's research papers. He comes into possession of this information in a very unique way, in a very mysterious way. And, what's funny is he's a 20-something-year-old man. He starts asking questions of his family about his granddad, who died before he was born. So he didn't know much about his granddad. His granddad was like a black sheep of the family. He'd ask family members, oh, what about granddad? And they'd say, you don't want to know anything about the old dude. He's out there. So he was a black sheep in a way of the family. So you tell a 20-year-old or a 20-something-year-old that he doesn't want to know something, and they're just the opposite.
Oh, yeah, don't open this door in the house.
Yeah, exactly. So he learns an interesting secret about his own family, and he learns wisdom from King Solomon himself. That's the basis of the book. It's the wise decision formula that Solomon used. And it's done through a myriad of stories. Some were completely factual. Some of them, I'm sure he took artistic license to do. But most of it, what's very interesting is some of the stories in the book, I could only find bits and pieces of the story. Everybody knows the story of Solomon wanting to split the child in half. I mean, that's a well-known story of Solomon that everyone knows. But very few people understood all the other stories. There's countless stories about Solomon. And most people in America in particular, they don't know those stories. And when I was researching it, I'd find these stories in hidden places, and I'd find bits and pieces. It wouldn't complete the story because back then the books weren't the way books are today. So it was very difficult to find the ending. I'd find, well, they'd start this tale and then they'd kind of end it abruptly, and you'd like, what? What's this about? So I'd have to
Mm-hmm.
dig into other places to try to find bits and pieces. And back in 2015, we didn't have AI, like you said earlier. It was not even a thing yet, so it was hard to get this. And some of these books, it was difficult for me to find. I had to get a card for the Library of Congress, and I had to work out a special deal with them to translate the books, because most of these books were in their original language, which I don't read. So I had to get special permission through the Library of Congress, and it wasn't a cheap endeavor to do this, but it was so much fun, and it was so interesting to read books that you know I would have never read, Chuck, if it wouldn't have been for this. So
Yeah.
it took me down a path that I would have never taken any other way.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think you sort of answered my next question, but one of the things, reading the Bible, is true with a lot of people. It's hard to read the Old Testament. I mean, I have to admit that I say, I'm going to read the entire Bible and I'm going to go through it, but you know, it was a struggle,
Yeah.
especially when they're building things and telling you the lengths of poles and stuff like that. I was like, I'm reading everything. I'm reading everything. So I probably don't know as much as I should about that, but it was really interesting because one of the great things about your book, it brought a character from the Old Testament to life and said, maybe I should understand more about this guy, or even King David, which is also well known. But that whole era of the Old Testament is something that it did bring out like a curiosity as I should really, because one of my questions was, and this is like showing my ignorance, and I think you sort of answer this, is in the stories of what Solomon wrote and all this stuff, did you take literary license in some of it? I mean, it sounds like you tried to be as factual as possible and then filled in holes where you had to.
I did.
But everything that we're reading in this book was some semblance of what actually
Yeah, yeah.
Solomon believed and wrote.
Well, because back in the BC era, people that were able to write, there were very few people that could write and read one language. That was rare, and those people were called scribes because they could scribe, they could write, and these scribes, they were considered very smart people because they could write and read a language, where most of the people didn't do that at the time. So Solomon could read and write 6 languages before he was 16. Now, yes, he was the son of a king, so he had no problem getting tutors. He had no problem finding the people that he needed to be around. But he was a brilliant man. He was high IQ at the time, and he took advantage of his status as the son of a king to make his knowledge accessible. So yeah, he was different in that way as well. But as far as the stories go, some of the stories I had to piece in the content. Some of it was in bits and pieces. Some of it was my own story. And I kind of crafted that into the book. Unless you know me personally, you won't be able to tell what's me and what's not. What's interesting in the book, I wrote it with a lot of symbolism, and there's a lot of symbolism. And when you reread it after this, you hear this story, you're going to look at it differently. Everybody that I've told this to said they went back and reread it, and they said, God, I can't believe I missed that. And so there's a lot of symbolism. The gentleman that's the main character, Joe Morris' son. Well, my mother's name was Josephine. My father's name was Morris, and I'm their son. So Joe, Maura's son. So Joe is me in essence. It dates back to my early years in the 1980s in this business. So some of that is factual from my standpoint. But there's a lot of symbolism in how Joe relates to the world. Uh, Without giving away storylines, he'll encounter a snake during his trip on one of his adventures. And how he communicates with the snake is very interesting. What he says to the snake. And, the snake being the serpent, being the devil, being a dastardly creature, if you will. He responds to that snake and to the island itself that he's on. This island, the Île de Mauvais Choix, is French for the Isle of Bad Choices. And all of our choices are surrounded by an ocean. It's surrounded by everything else we do. Our one choice is not just who we are. And it's surrounded by other things. So the island itself represents the bad choices we make. And on this island is wisdom. Here's wisdom on an island that's named for bad choices. That's because we each have the ability to be wise. We have to know how to do it to make it happen. So just because you make a bad choice, it doesn't make you a bad person. Solomon made a lot of bad choices. He made a lot of good choices. He was a very wise man. But that doesn't mean every choice he made was wise.
Yeah. Sometimes they make you wiser, right?
They do in the long run. They're supposed to. Yeah.
Maybe it's a painful way to learn to become wise, but it happens.
It does happen, and yes, but Solomon had 700 wives. That's not a wise decision, in my opinion. So, so there's a lot of things about Solomon that say, hey, he was just a regular guy, and he knew he was just a regular guy when it came to wisdom. He didn't think he was special in any way. There's nothing to point to. He was a very selfless man in so many ways. The way he treated the people that like the soldiers, if a soldier would leave a mother with children and the mother didn't have an elder son, he would marry the woman so that the kingdom could take care of her. It wasn't for any other reason, but back then, if a single mother had to live and she didn't have an elder son to take care of her, she had to either prostitute or she had to do really bad things to make life worth living. He knew that. So he took care of the people as best he could. And, in today's world, it looks like, hey, he was, a very hedonistic individual. Well, I don't know how much of that is true, because I don't see a lot of it in the writings. He wasn't his purpose for doing a lot of what he did, people don't understand what it was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. And it's interesting that you mentioned that basically the character Joe is you, because I do know a little bit about you from meeting you and reading your materials. And like what I meant by the book wasn't what I expected. I thought the book was going to be about you. And I started reading it and say, wait, that's not Tony. There's no Tony in here. What's the story? But then, I read going about the life insurance business, the American college, and living in Louisiana and all this stuff. I said, well, it's probably is kind of about Tony, right?
It is, yeah. And there's no island of bad choices in Louisiana. Everybody has that. It's their real island. Well, there's lots of islands like that.
Could be Bourbon Street or the French Quarter, right?
Without a doubt.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, and then the other question again, because when we talked at ICMG a few years ago, and you were talking about solutionary, my understanding was that that was a phrase that you coined. But then as I'm reading the book, it's saying, is the term solutionary, or did you just apply that definition to what Solomon was doing? Is the term solutionary an old term? Is it something that if you translate a certain way that was part of that story?
Yes. The way Solutionary came into existence in 2009, this was way before the concept of the book even came into play. I used to call myself a problem solver. I looked at myself in business as a problem solver. I enjoyed the insurance and financial and estate planning aspects because it was like every client would bring all of these pieces of their life and drop them on my desk, and I had to put that puzzle together. I had to take those pieces, put it together the way they wanted it to look. And so I was a problem solver in every aspect, but I hated the term problem solver because in my mind, it elevates the problem. It puts the problem first. And don't get me wrong, problems need to be front and center, and you have to address your problems. But I wanted something that said, not only am I a problem solver, but I am someone you should come to for solutions to your problems. And there was no phrase or word, Chuck, in the English language that did that. None.
Mm-hmm.
I looked. So and at the time, I liked the word visionary because, you know, a visionary is someone who sees something that other people don't. I like that. So I thought, well, let's apply solutionary, someone who sees a solution no one else sees. So that was my simple definition when I did it. In '09, I Googled solutionary. And back in '09, you know, the computer age was what, 20 years old maybe, or not even. But I Googled it and got 0 hits, not one hit on solutionary. And you can't Google anything today and get 0 hits. You can't.
No, that's
So,
true.
so I Googled it, couldn't find anything, so I started using it in '09. I put it on my LinkedIn page. I did this, I did that. I did all kinds of things with it. And I would start calling myself a solutionary. When I wrote the book, I had software that could translate ancient Greek. So I said, well, let's see what that word would have meant in ancient Greek. In the time of King Solomon, the Greeks were really big on philosophy and things like that. So I said, this would be something that I could see Solomon using, because Solomon could read and write Greek. So I said, let's see what it means in Greek. And in ancient Greek, it would mean tool of wisdom. Because Sol was the sun god, it was also the god of wisdom. So solution and the airy, solutionary, is tool of. So tool of wisdom is what the true breakdown of that word would have been in ancient Greek. So I thought, how cool is that? You know, and I've been using it for a number of years. Here I am writing a book about BC era, and I find out that it would have been something that I think Solomon would have liked, you know, tool of wisdom.
Yeah.
So that's how the name came into fruition. And now there's a whole definition around solutionary. And, you know, it's the unselfish discernment of knowledge that comes from a trusted source. And the 3 areas of knowledge is education, experience, and morals and ethics. You can't have wisdom without these things. It has to be true, So it has to be from a trusted source, meaning it can't be a lie. You can't have any decision based on a lie that's going to be wise. It's just not possible. And it can't be unethical or immoral, because if that's the case, it's, again, not wise. It's not the best choice. And Solomon knew that there was three entities that were affected by every decision we make. Every decision, three different entities of people are affected. Just like we started our conversation this morning saying my mother knew that her decision affected the children. You know, it wasn't us that made that choice, she did. But we had to live with her choice. So it's the same thing with every decision we make. It doesn't just affect us. That's why it has to be selfless. If it's not selfless, then that means we're not considering the other parties. We're just considering ourselves. Now, people have questioned me through the years and said, well, Tony, I can make a wise decision based on it benefiting me, and it benefits others that I didn't even think about. Well, that's true. But in retrospect, it would still be a selfless decision because it benefited other people besides you. You might have been selfish in your nature when you made that decision, but the truth was it did positively affect the other people as well. Now, if it's selfish and it's going to harm other people, well, then of course that knocks it out on the moral basis. That the moral basis knocks it out, that it's definitely not the right decision.
Yeah, that's good. I was gonna, two things about that. I think I mentioned to you in an email that I did the same thing. I Googled Solutionary to say, well, I think he said it's some, and I thought some lady in some, I don't know if you've looked recently, but claimed that she coined the term in 2018. I'm going, wait a minute, I know that's not true. Tony's been writing about this since at least 2015, and I'm sure it was, a while before that. I said, you need to talk to her. I mean, she's, or you should have gotten it patented or something. I don't know.
You can't. I tried to protect the word, Chuck. I spent good money trying to protect it too before the attorneys finally told me you can't do that. I said, then why did you charge me money? That was not a wise decision.
Sometimes going down that kind of path is not a wise decision.
But yes, the word can't be protected, I found out. But I have the origin of it because I've started using it before anyone else. Right. So I'm okay with it, and anybody wants to take credit, I'm okay with that too, because she's not benefiting from it, I'm not benefiting from it. So
right. Yeah, and the other part I thought was was part of our conversation a couple of years ago. Is my company name is Problem Solving Enterprises, and I probably use maybe I named it something differently because I really was focused on solutions. But my issue as an actuary, people have an idea what actuaries do. And they would come up to me and say, price me this product. I need this product. And I would annoy people because I'd say, well, why? Why do we? Because they weren't telling me their problem.
That's right.
They were telling me what they thought the solution was. And I really wanted to, if I was going to create a solution, I'd want to know what I'm solving, what solution I'm solving for. And it's a very, very, very common thing, and it's probably true for other people, but particularly actuaries, because everybody in the insurance industry has this stereotype of what we do. And I like to think I'm different. I purposely didn't put actuary in the name of the company because I didn't want to be pigeonholed into a particular area, because I get involved in everything. Sometimes much to the annoyance of people I work with that, I don't stay in my lane. I like to work on technology. I like to work on customer service. I love to work on marketing. My son Dan's a marketing guy, and I often have discussions with him, and I'm not as trained as he is, but I have ideas.
Right.
I'm thinking about writing a LinkedIn post about health insurance, but I'm not a health actuary. But obviously, big problems there, the need of solutions, and I have lots of ideas that maybe are not. I don't see any good solutions out there because mostly it's just phrases and slogans and things like that, which aren't solutions to something so complicated. But sad. So I had a connection to that to the solutionary idea, so that's the other thing. So then my next question, you mentioned in I think in the preface or forward to the book, that it's not a religious book per se. It's about characters in the Bible are part of the book where you can learn from, which obviously is a history book, right? And you're learning a lot of history from that. And there's a lot of people that can take even the stuff about the power of three, and you talk about souls. Well, everybody has different definition. I think everybody would admit they have some kind of inner self that's separate from their mind or their body. I mean, you feel it.
That's right.
You may not attribute it to God or attribute it to, but I think everybody would admit that it's there.
Yes, they do.
And so I think in that context, you can take all of the, you and I would think, well, that's where they got it from. They just don't realize it. but you can take the lessons in the book and use those, regardless of whether you're a Christian or Catholic or Jewish or whatever the case may be, or atheist. You can still take things from it. So I don't think the book is strictly a business book either, but it is a business book. Obviously, when you talked about life insurance and that was your background, I assume that part of the thought in your mind was this could be valuable to people in the insurance business as well as any other business. The concepts of leadership, which I assume, leadership does not necessarily mean you're a boss or a manager, right? Leadership can come in many forms. You could be at the bottom rung and be a leader. That it's applicable to that in the business world. Can you speak to how you were hoping that the book can apply to business issues and business solutions? I assume leadership's a big part of that, and obviously wisdom. If you're going to be in a business, wisdom probably helps.
Yeah. Well, that was the premise. The original premise was for it to be more of a leadership-driven book on wise decision making, because I think every leader needs to understand how their decisions play out and how it affects other people. None of their decisions are strictly for them, no matter what they think. If they think, well, I'm going to study this to make me smarter. Well, yeah, it will make you smarter, but it's also going to help you handle other people in the future. So no decision you make is just for you, no matter what you believe. So every leader needs to understand the components of a wise decision. And I think we have to be more intentional in making wise decisions. In my studies for this book, Chuck, what amazed me was the United States in particular. I didn't go worldwide with it, but I looked at numerous studies from American institutions, and none of the studies show we are making wiser decisions than ever before. We're making worse decisions than we've ever made as a country. And that's telling as to why that is. And if you're going to run a business and you don't have the experience to make the decisions, you're losing a key component of wisdom. And experience doesn't mean your wisdom. I mean your experience. It could be the experience of a mentor. It just has to be a trusted source, meaning that it's true experience. If you know that experience was true and you trust the person that gave you that experience, it's your experience. It becomes you. Mm-hmm. So the whole purpose behind looking at this book from a business standpoint is to say we're failing as a country when it comes to wise decisions. We're making the stupidest decisions we've ever made as a country. Why is that? And there's numerous reasons for it. But the biggest reason is companies don't keep people anymore. What was interesting when I did my study was the biggest reason people don't keep anyone anymore was a law of 1972. In 1972, Congress passed a law that allowed companies to put pensions into a 401k. 401k is a code of the tax code that was added in 1972 that allowed pensions to no longer exist. People used to stay with companies for pensions. They wouldn't leave. Companies benefited from all of that wisdom, but yet now, and don't get me wrong, the law's a good law. So I'm not saying that the 401k is a bad thing. I'm not saying that. But one of the ill consequences of that law is people now can move jobs quick. They don't lose that pension. That's when we saw the dip, the first dip in retention of people. Before that, people stayed at businesses for years and in places they shouldn't have stayed. Now, take that into consideration too. They stayed for the wrong reason, but they stayed. And the companies were able to make very good decisions because they had experience backing their decisions. Every decision that helps society usually starts at a business level. Every decision. If I have a sick child, I can't solve my child's problem. I'm not a doctor. I need to go to a doctor to get his help to solve my problem with my sick child. If I have a plumbing problem, I'm not a plumber. I got to hire a plumber to come in and fix my problem. So every business exists for only one reason. They provide a service or a need that the consumer can't fill on their own. That's the only reason every business exists. The first one. So if we can't make wise decisions as a group of businesses, we cannot advance society. We no longer have the ability to advance society. That's a problem. And that's a major problem in this country.
Yeah.
Now, it's probably worldwide. I don't have any documentation on worldwide, but I have tons of documentation on the America economy and the America workforce. We are failing our workforce because we turn over people too quick. We're not keeping the experience. So the company leaders, and by the way, that propels another problem that complicates things, because now the people in leadership shouldn't be in leadership. The people that are leading companies have no clue what they're doing. And it was funny, I gave a talk to a group of CEOs one time. This was right after COVID. And Chuck, I'll never forget, I asked the CEOs around the table, I said, raise your hand if you ever managed a pandemic before this one. Raise your hand, please. Show me how many of you had experience managing under a pandemic situation. Nobody raised their hands. I said, okay, how many of you had education in pandemic management? How many of you already studied it before?
Yeah.
Show,
or even know when they happen, when the previous pandemics have happened.
Exactly. So I said, show me that you're educated. So you don't have education in it. You had no experience in it. And yet I hope you were morally guided. But we made decisions during COVID that were just ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And it wasn't based on education. It wasn't based on experience. And it wasn't guided by morals. It was guided wrongly.
Yeah.
That crippled this country. If we ever do have a pandemic again, I hope somebody steps up and says, we are not following that same pattern again, because this could have crippled this country. This technology we're using today, Riverside, wasn't available just 10 years before the pandemic. Zoom wasn't available before the pandemic, 10 years before. If this pandemic had happened 10 years earlier, this country would have been crippled, because business could continue in some kind of way due to this technology. If this technology would not have been present, it would have crippled the society, this economic society. So thank God the pandemic happened when it did.
Yeah.
So those kind of things that should teach people the importance of understanding wisdom, understanding you can be a wiser person if you understand the steps it takes to be wise. If you understand it, then you should be able to do that. But if you don't know those steps or you don't know those principles, you're winging it. And that's
Right.
what I told these CEOs. I said, those three things were not present, and every one of you were flying by the seat of your pants, and yet you made decisions firmly, and it proved to be wrong. And it could have been so much worse than it was. You mentioned health insurance. Hospitals were paid for every one of those COVID deaths. How many of you think that the COVID death, if they had COVID and they died of a heart attack, they were put as a COVID death so the hospital could get 70 grand? That was selfish. That was a poor decision, and we allowed it to happen. So there was so many of that going on. That's why we'll never know how many people truly died of COVID. We'll never know that because we skewered the numbers for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
So there's so many things we don't know that it scares me to think that if this ever happens again, I hope we're a smarter people. I hope we're a wiser people. Because if not, it's going to it could bode terribly for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the difficulties I find with a lot of this is the unintended consequences and the fact of decisions that people don't appreciate, and the fact that both sides on an issue want to believe that the other person is evil, the other person is Hitler, all that kind of stuff. When the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, that's true. Again, not sticking on healthcare, but Obamacare. You talked about turnover. Obamacare caused turnover of older people because I know many people where healthcare got more and more expensive, health insurance got more and more expensive, yet they couldn't get any help. But if they quit their job and retired at 50, instead of continuing to work, they could get free health care. Yeah. So you had a lot of people leave the workforce and I'm sure that wasn't the intention. I'm sure that Obama and all the people involved thought they were doing good things, that the intention was to do good things, but to not have
they didn't have the fact
wisdom.
That's right.
Yeah, to not have the wisdom to look at all the things that could happen as a result, and it's still the case. And the other thing I think of with that is, again, it's another healthcare thing. When if I get around to it, writing some LinkedIn posts, one of the first things that healthcare is a big argument right now. I think they blame health insurance companies certainly deserve a lot of the blame, but not all of it.
Right.
I mean, they all live on an 80% loss ratio. So they can be at most 20% of the problem. They can't be 100% of the problem. Yet everybody on all sides, just health insurance companies are the biggest evil, and they're all the problem, and we should go after them. And they're just financing the thing. They're not. Maybe they do it wrong, and maybe there are better ways to do it. But then they've got all the regulations and stuff that cause them to have to go a certain way. Some sure make selfish decisions, but others are just sort of stuck with the environment that they're working in. And I think that has to be appreciated. One of the things I thought is, and this will never happen with politicians, that the first thing they need to decide when they're looking for solutions to the healthcare problems is, are they going to move towards trying to make the free market work better? Or are they going to move towards the government taking over and doing things? Right. I know which way I would go, but there could be arguments on both sides. I mean, for that, but they never when they start going at each other, they never to realize that this person is going in one direction, this person is going in the other direction, you know that they're never going to come up with a solution because they see the solution in two different locations.
But the reason that is,
it's not being brought up.
but the reason that is, Chuck, is because they both trust the wrong people.
Right.
Again, the solution formula, the wisdom formula, you have to have trusted sources. They trust the wrong people. You know, I spoke to numerous committees when Hillary Clinton was trying to get health care passed. I spent about 6 months of my life traveling around this country speaking against government-run healthcare for a lot of, and I had all the facts and figures, and it's, you know, we're not the kind of country that Denmark is. We're not the kind of country that England is. We're not the kind of country that if I go in for a leg amputation and they amputate the wrong leg by accident, in one of those other countries, you cannot sue the doctor because they work for the government, so you can't sue them, so they'll cut off your other leg for free, but that's going to be the outcome. And when you tell that to people, you know, the politicians aren't going to tell you that want government health care. They won't tell you that it does away with tort reform. It does away with it. You can no longer sue your medical provider. So are you willing to do that? And the answer in the United States has always been no. I don't. If my doctor does something that that was definitely wrong, I should have reprobation for it. I should be able to get my money back. I should be able to get some compensation. That's not the way it is in government-run healthcare. So there's so many things that the public don't know because they don't want to know it. You know, I'm a mechanic. I'm not an insurance guy. I don't want to know about that. The other people should know about that. I don't need to know about that. My dad was big on when you'd ask Dad a question, if it wasn't something he knew an answer to, he just wouldn't answer you. He'd tell you, my opinion doesn't matter because I don't know what I'm talking about. So
Yeah,
even if I have an opinion, what good is it? It's of no good to anyone but me. It's my opinion. Well, we've gone away from that, Chuck. We've gone completely away. These politicians, when I'd go speak to them, you can tell when somebody's listening to you. You can tell. And I can't tell you the times I sat down and gave a presentation to a group of politicians and not one of them paid an ounce of attention to me. They already had their questions that they wanted answered. It gave them time in front of the camera, so they didn't care whether my statement answered their question. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. They already have their own conclusions drawn because they think they know it. And they're not interested. That's part of the problem. You see?
Don't you hate it when when they have the Senate committees and somebody comes to speak before the Senate and they got the senator, whichever, they got 5 minutes and they'll take 4 minutes to just talk.
Right.
And then they'll ask a question, but they won't yes or no answer, and they won't listen to an answer and go because they're obviously. I said, well, why did they even bring this person before the committee? They could have just done their little speechifying without anybody there and accomplished the same thing. And yeah, that's frustrating. And then the other part again, I think is people listen to the wrong people because some people are just very convincing. Yes. Right? And you listen to them and it sounds good and you want to believe what they're saying. The government's going to take care of you. You want to believe it. You don't have a sense of history to understand why that doesn't work. And so it's tough because you look at people who, you know, are supporting a certain side. It's not, it is their fault in the sense that they're not making wise decisions and they haven't learned. But in that instance, at that moment, you say, well, of course they would rather have that. It's harder to talk about solving things in the free market. It's much more complicated. It's not, you know, it's the old these people need money. These people have money. Okay, the solution is give some of the money to these people, to these people. That's very simple. Everybody understands it. They don't understand that it won't work, but it's a much easier to understand than the nuances of capitalism and how it's worked and how the free market works. So it's a very difficult thing. But you're right. It's tough.
What's interesting that Solomon understood. He understood there was only three solutions to every problem. Only three. The right solution, the wrong solution, and the acceptable concession. The right solution, you don't pick it because it doesn't give you enough pleasure. The wrong solution, you don't usually take because it gives you too much pain. And then the acceptable concession is the one you pick because it gives me just enough pleasure and not quite enough pain. But what they don't understand is the acceptable concession doesn't solve the problem. It just pushes it down the road. So Solomon understood that. There's a right answer to every problem. Every single problem has a right decision. You got to be willing to look for it. And you can't come to the table thinking you know it. Because if you think you know it, and you might know it, but if you think you know it, you're not going to listen to anybody else. So you have to come to the table with that understanding that I might not have the right answer. I think I do, but I might not. I might be wrong. You ask a politician if they're wrong, and the answer is always no. I'm right. I know I'm right. So that's part of the problem in the United States. Yeah. We don't have that sense of I might be wrong. I might not know what I'm doing. And I want the right answer. If they want the right answer, they got to listen to other people. They have to, because you can't get it just by pulling it out the air. You have to get it from education, experience, and moral and ethics. Those are the only three things that'll give it to you. Yeah. Solomon got that. Solomon understood it better than anybody. His little thing, let's split the child in half, give one part to each. He knew that the real mother would easily say, no, don't do that. Don't hurt my child. Give the child to the other woman. I'd rather somebody else raise my child than my child die. He understood that. He understood that the truth would come out, whose child it was. If it wasn't that woman's child, she didn't care. If I can't have it, kill the child. I don't care. So you have to be willing to find the truth. You have to be willing. And too many, I don't like using the term leader. Too many people in authority today don't do that. They don't try to find a real answer. They try to make the best answer for their company, which is a selfish move. And that's why we have the problems we have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I often, when I have an opinion on something, if there's a debate going on or an issue, I'll often start out, I don't think I am. I could be wrong, but. Right. And many times, starting that way gets thrown back at you. Like, oh, Chuck doesn't even know for sure what he's talking about. Well, my point is that nobody knows for sure what they're talking about. And the other part of this is interesting is because part of the reason I'm interested in doing these podcasts is reacting and listening to me as something. I'm an introvert. I've always been an introvert. I get on Zoom calls where we're discussing issues, actuarial Zoom calls and stuff, and I won't say a word because everybody's talking about what they want to do with the new mortality table, blah, 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 blah. And I feel like, I don't really know what the right answer is, and I'm just listening to what everybody's saying. And then by the time I think I have an opinion, I want to say something, that calls over. So I often... That's one of my habits. I often follow up with an email say, I heard the conversation was really great, and this is what I think, because I have to, that was probably another word I wanted to get into the name of my company, is listening is so valuable in help making decisions.
How we learn,
stuff.
brother.
Even people you think are crazy, you don't know what you're talking about, you often find, well, they do have an element of truth in what they're saying. And you should take that into consideration. But yeah, it's a problem. And you're right. You would think that a politician that would come out and be, I think this is what we should do, but convince me I'm wrong. I don't know everything. Most of the things that a president has to deal with or the senators have to deal with are extremely complicated problems. And there is a best solution, but sometimes it's not easy to get to.
It's never, yeah.
And I just would respect so much somebody who takes that attitude of saying, here's some thoughts, here's some things I think we can do, but we should talk about it because I could be wrong about some of these things. And there are very few that do that. One of my favorite senators, though, who does that kind of way, again, from Louisiana, Senator Kennedy, John Kennedy, I just love listening to him because he takes an approach as, I don't know, I'm just going to ask these questions. And he has an idea what he thinks is right, but he does it in the form of asking questions and actually listening to what people's answers are.
He just wrote a book you got to read, Chuck. It's the funniest book you've ever read.
Did he throw, all of his, things? That's a great idea.
It is a great book, and it gives you a great understanding of our politics today. But he does it in a very fun-hearted way. And yeah, the book is a great read. Great read.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I used one of them lately that I've heard, it may be old, I don't know, from a couple of weeks ago, where he's talking to somebody and he says, you may not be the dumbest person in the room, but you better hope the dumbest person doesn't die. And I thought, well, yeah, sometimes I feel like I may not be the dumbest, but.
Yeah, he could insult people and get away with it with his little talk.
Yeah.
The way he does it. He's very, very, he's a good politician in a lot of ways.
Yeah. When I left grad school at LSU, there were 14 people in my class. And we could sort of rank ourselves. We knew I was somewhat in the middle. And I thought, okay, I'm doing okay. I can get through this. I ended up leaving LSU because 7 people dropped out, which I was in the middle at first. Now I'm at the bottom. I don't think I am cut out for this.
I'm going to be number 8. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in those thoughts. I guess my last question for you, unless you got other things you want to bring up or talk about, is what's next for you in terms of what you're. Oh, I know. I had a question before that. I was surprised that on the book. I read through the book. It was very interesting. I got to the last page, and it completely surprised me. It's all of a sudden the book had a sort of. I didn't think of it this way until I got to the last page. It had a Da Vinci Code feel to it. Is there another book?
Yes.
Coming?
Yes, there is. I was waiting until I retired to do the second book in this series. And now that I'm retired, I am working on that. The book was complete, by the way. I could have came out with it any time. We had a change in my work situation changed during the writing of the second book, and I didn't feel it was a good environment for me to come. I had a full-time job, and I know the first book took a lot out of me because I had a lot of speaking engagements on the book. The president at the time at the college allowed me to put it into the ethics library as an ethical book, so I could speak on the book and do college work too. I didn't feel comfortable doing it for the second book because it did take a lot of time. So I waited until I retired for the second book. And now that I'm retired, it will be coming out soon. It is all complete. I keep going back, and since I wrote it, I've learned a few more things, so I'm trying to add things and keep it moving in the right direction. But it did end in a cliffhanger. You're right, and there were
And it's funny, it was very clever because I wasn't thinking that during the entire reading of the book. Might not even have been the last whole page. Might have been the last couple of paragraphs. I go, oh my gosh, there's another book coming.
there
There
you
were loose ends. There were loose ends. So I figured, well, maybe in a story like this, there has to be loose ends. I mean, you couldn't know everything about Solomon, blah blah blah. But it really hooked me there.
There's so much. I had so much material when I wrote the first book. I wanted to keep it under 250 pages. So that was the big premise. And then I had so much content from reading so much about Solomon. I couldn't put it all in one book. It would have been too thick. So I decided to come out with a second book on the thing. Since then, I have, right now I'm writing 4 books at the same time. So 2 of them are in the final edits. So 2 will be coming out very soon. I've written 1 other book since this one came out. The other book is a Lenten devotional. It's specifically spiritual. It's not a business book by any stretch of the imagination. It is strictly a religious book. It's on the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. I'm like, as you know, Chuck, I like uncomplicating things. And back in Jesus' time, there was 2 calendars at the same time. There was the Julian calendar for the Romans, and they had the Hebrew calendar for the Jews. They had 2 different calendars, and they worked completely differently, by the way. And the Jewish year was 360 days. So it was seasonal based. It was based on the moon and the season cycles. And in 1500, sometime in the early 1500s, the Gregorian calendar became the calendar for most of the world. And so we had 3 calendars. If you wanted to know, well, when did Jesus really die? You know, if it was in if you use the Hebrew calendar, there was a certain date. If you use the Julian calendar, it was a different date. If you use the Gregorian calendar, it was a third date. So I used all of the knowledge from all of those calendars and reconciled it to make a timeline that gives you the time of day and the exact day Jesus died according to the Gregorian calendar. So you can literally walk the same steps as Christ, knowing which day, what time, when did it happen. Because you mentioned earlier about reading the Bible, it's so hard to say, well, when was this written compared to this one? And even in the same books, when you read Wisdom, for instance, the book of Wisdom in the Bible, or Ecclesiastes as it's known, if you read those books, some was written by David, some was written by Solomon, and they're mixed matched. They're not all in the same, it's not chronological in nature. And so I wanted to say, okay, I looked online. There's no chronological order to what Jesus went through historically. So I wanted, and I'm a history buff. I love history. So even if you're not spiritual, the story of Jesus, there's no controversy that he changed the world. He literally changed the world, and so much so that time changed. We went from before Christ to after his birth, you know, from AD, which is from the date of his conception. So we literally changed the way we mark time because of this man. So even if you don't believe he's God, he's a spirit, he's a very influential man that lived. And I wanted to say, okay, during this period of time, when did it happen? How did it happen? What caused it? And it's, in my opinion, it's a one-of-a-kind book, and It hit bestseller on two different readers for bestsellers last year. It came out, the first edition came out last Lent. We're doing a rebirth as a second edition because there were some things I wanted to add to the first book I didn't get a chance to add. So I'm coming out with a second edition. It's out now. So that was the other thing I'd been working on, and I'm working now on the marketing of that because there's so many churches and pastors and reverends that want to put this out during the Lenten season because it is different. It's a different read. You're going to learn a lot of things, whether you're spiritual or not. You'll learn things about the Roman Empire. You're going to learn things about how the people lived and why this was important. So it's a very cool read, in my opinion.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds good. It made me think of one other thing with your book. I do have the devotional book. I still got to look at that, but I'll be sure to watch for the one you're talking about. But the other thing that occurred to me, have you ever thought about that? It would make a great movie.
It's being considered. Solomon's is being considered. It's on the list for one company to do. It would be an interesting book.
I mean, they could do so many things with it. I mean, setting in the past in Solomon's time and the current time. I mean, it would just be fascinating. And there's a lot of movies, that have religion in it. I mean, I don't know if you've watched the Chosen One.
Yeah.
That's a great series. I
It
mean,
is.
I really it made the whole life of Jesus. It really brought out his humanity, how human he was, and the humor in it, and all the things that maybe in the style of the way the Bible was originally written maybe doesn't appeal to people.
Right.
But you watch that movie, it just makes you want to learn more.
Yep. So true.
And I think the book could do that kind of thing too. So
I was pleased that they reached out to me. It wasn't the same company that reached out, but a couple of years ago, I created a slideshow that we sent to a few movie producers and got some hits. People were interested, and so it's being considered.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'll look forward to that.
I would too. I'd like to see who they get to play Joe.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. You haven't aged at all. You could play it.
I don't want to do that. No, that's not on the even remotely being considered right now.
What do you think? What do you think? Brad Pitt or something like that, right?
He'd have to be a young guy. I don't know who they.
Yeah, I guess Brad Pitt's not young anymore, is he?
No, he isn't. No, he isn't. None of us are, Chuck.
Okay. Well, anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to bring up?
Buddy,
Otherwise,
we can
I'll
talk all day long, you and I. Thank you.
Yeah,
for doing
this is great. I don't want to take too much of your time. We're already almost an hour and 20 minutes. So
If
I
you
really,
ever
again,
want to talk
appreciate
about
this.
anything, Chuck, you know how to find me. I'm happy to do specific topics for you. It's very interesting. I do probably 5 or 6 of these a month for different organizations that want to talk about wise decision making. That's one of the reasons I think the book did so well, because it touches everybody's life. Everybody makes decisions. I get emails. I put my email out there, and a lot of people send me comments through email, or they put reviews on the book on Amazon. But the emails, some of them are just unbelievable. That people believe they made a wrong decision that affected the death of their spouse or the death of a child. I mean, that's so hard on people. That's so hard when they take the burden on themselves. And so, because of the experiences I've had, because of this book, it's opened my eyes a lot. That a lot of people take responsibility, and then there's the other side of the coin where they take no responsibility. So it's a very interesting topic, and I could talk on this stuff all day long. Solomon is another one. He was an amazing guy. I would have loved to have met the man. He was a very unique individual. His father named him Solomon because he wanted peace. David was a warrior. He was tired of battle. He was tired of it. So that's why he named his son Solomon, because in Hebrew, Solomon means peace. And in Greek, Solomon found out his name meant wisdom. And that's why I think Solomon asked God for wisdom. And Solomon had the longest reign of peace in Jewish history. The Jewish calendar is about 5,800 years old. And in 5,800 years, the 40 years of Solomon were the most peaceful time in Jewish history.
That's unbelievable.
And his name was peace. His name meant peace. And the same thing goes for wisdom. His name means wisdom in Greek, and he's lived up to that as well. So I think he's a model that we can all learn from, that there's so much about this man, regardless if you're, like you said from the beginning, regardless if you're Christian, regardless if you're Jewish, it really doesn't matter if you're atheist. You could still learn from this wise man. I mean, he had a lot of things going for him, and he was a very unique character. He was a very unique guy.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really, again, appreciate it. I'm repeating myself, but you're right. We could go on for hours talking about some of this stuff. Keep an eye out for if I do them. I think I'm going to do them. My healthcare posts, because I think we're probably on the same page with a lot of that. And I'm going to say, these are complicated problems. I don't know the answers, but here's some thoughts. Maybe we can get something going on that.
Be happy to help. I'll be happy to promote it too, because we do need to get this under control. And they're looking in the wrong place right now.
Yeah.
They're looking in the wrong place to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's that I think it was an old story from when I was in Louisiana, the old story about the drunk under the light post that lost his keys. And he says, well, where did you lose your keys? Well, he lost it in the dark alley, but the light's better over here.
Oh, that's funny, Chuck. And that's perfect. That's exactly what's going on right now. So, yeah, that is perfect. That's a great joke. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
thank you, my friend.
Okay.
Thanks,
we'll talk
Chuck.
to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.